This is video LO3, Understanding the Language in Language Objectives. Most teachers don't get much education or practice in developing language objectives or in studying the language themselves. But all teachers teach language, and so they need to know. This video explains the types of language that language objectives focus on. Video LO2 explained briefly where language fits into the language objectives. This video looks in more detail at what the categories of language include. Categories more specifically are language structure, discourse and genres, vocabulary, language functions, and language learning strategies. Another word for language structure, and probably more familiar, is grammar. Most native speakers think that they know the grammar of English, but it's different to use it and to teach or explain it. Take this quiz and see how good your grammar is. Did your results on the quiz show that you need to brush up on your grammar with your students? Awesome! There's a shared learning experience. Discourse and genres are another category of language. This is maybe the least used in an individual grade or class, but still quite important as students proceed through their schooling. Think about how you write a newspaper article, using the 5 W's. Would you write a play that way? If not, how do you know how to do that? You have to teach students about genre. Here are some examples. The same goes with discourse. Body language and appropriateness, for example, vary among cultures and contexts. Direct instruction on some of these discourse items can help students interact and participate effectively. Vocabulary consists of a lot more than sight recognition. How would you define knowing a word? Here are some more ideas. Being able to spell it, recognizing it, defining it, using it in a sentence, for example, explaining it to someone else, being able to draw what it means, and knowing synonyms, antonyms, and homonyms. If students know words and they can make grammatical sentences, it still doesn't mean that they know how to put those words together to do language functions. For example, to convince someone of something, or to invite or complain, for example. Even if they know it in their first language, it might be very different in English. So if students want to discuss guidelines in language for effective discussion, and some practice using them might be in order. What functions do these photos represent? Can you think of others? Language strategies, the final category, are used to understand and learn language. For example, students take notes, try to recognize unknown words, read and then listen to a text, or listen and then read, build mental images, read or listen to a text several times, keep a vocabulary log or journal, or use a word wall, read aloud, draw a concept map, and there are many others. There are a wide range of ideas that are used for language strategies, but it's important that these things are taught. Students don't naturally know how to take good notes, for example, and ELLs may not have ever taken notes at all. Here's an example. Students will learn the vocabulary as a content objective for the water cycle, but need to know how to sequence their ideas. So, with this chart, we can look at the different aspects of language that is required for students to be able to access and complete the content objective. For example, with grammar, students need to know sequence words, sentence order, and present tense to explain to a partner how the water cycle works. Of course, they need the vocabulary, and functions include explaining, asking for, understanding, and others. Discourse is exposition or expository speech, and they also need to know how to take turns. Because the language is oral, one of the strategies that students need is clear pronunciation. When the teacher understands what is necessary and what the students already know, she can choose what language to put into her language objective. For example, this teacher understands that the vocabulary will be taught as part of the content objective, and that students know basically what these functions are. They've stressed turn taking in class many times. So this teacher decides to focus on sequence words in her language objective in order to make sure that students have an interesting and useful explanation for their partner. So her language objective might be SWABOT use sentence words, and she can include in oral explanations if she wants to. Here's another example. The content objective is students will be able to provide examples of the use of addition in their daily lives. In her language aspects chart, this teacher realizes that for grammar, students would need to be able to use first person singular and a verb, and those need to match: I go, I make. Specific vocabulary words, they need to be able to list, and again, they need clear pronunciation. In this case, there are no real discourse strategies or discourse examples that the teacher is including. The teacher decides that students need more than one language objective because they need practice with some of the grammar issues, and they also might need help making a log of their vocabulary words that it will be specific to each student. So the teacher decides to have two language objectives. Use the pronoun I with correct verb forms, and use personal vocabulary to provide examples. Here's a final example. The content objective is students will be able to create and obtain answers to 3 interview questions about local politics. Eventually, you'll be able to figure out the language needed for a language objective in your head very quickly. For now, think about it for a minute and ask yourself what grammar, vocabulary, functions, discourse, and strategies students might need in the language objective in order to meet the content objective. Here's what our teacher said. And the teacher, knowing what her students already know, decides to have these 2 language objectives for the content objective. Students will form grammatically correct questions, and students will take notes using keywords. What did you understand from this video about the language of language objectives? Test yourself by taking this short quiz. There are some other hints that will help you as a teacher continue to understand and develop your understanding of language. Here are some ideas. First, you can take online grammar quizzes or use grammar books and other resources to help become more familiar with how to teach grammar of English. Work with other teachers to determine what students' language needs are and who will help teach them. Pay attention to the language that students use and how they use it to help you understand what language students need. Make a list with examples of genres to hang in your classroom for reference for both you and your students. Let students help you decide what they need to know to be successful. Finally, do some research on language strategies to help understand more about what these strategies entail. Just because you might be a native or fluent speaker of English doesn't mean that the intricacies of English language are available to you at the tip of your tongue. For your students' sake, it's worth learning more about the language of language objectives. View other videos in this series for more information and resources.